Welcome to the Fully Mindful podcast. I'm your host, Melissa. I designed this podcast for you. I'm so happy you're here. We are talking about what it means to live with more intention, creativity, and authenticity so we can make aligned connections. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer turned coach who found the healing power of breathwork and the powerful impact of mindfulness as we navigate this wild and beautiful ride of life. Here at The Fully Mindful, we dive deep with inspiring guests, share solo mini-sodes that are packed with tools you can apply immediately, and I mix it up a bit with tangents and sidebars where my friend and host of the New World Normal podcast, Debbie Harrell, joins us for some down-to-earth, sometimes random, but always meaningful conversations. If you're ready to breathe, reflect, and grow, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. All right. Well, today I have the honor of speaking with Reverend Dr. David Alexander, a distinguished New Thought minister and author dedicated to the fusion of spirituality and social justice, currently leading the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. Reverend Dr. Alexander has a rich history of ministry, including co-founding with a number of others the New Thought Center for Spiritual Living here in Oregon, where I'm at and where I have attended. His recent book, Freedom from Discord, The Promise of New Thought, Liberation Theology, offers a very compelling exploration of how spiritual principles can serve as a foundation for societal transformation. But before we dive into his book, we're going to take a step back because many of you listeners may not be familiar with the New Thought movement, what it is, where did it come from, how did it shape the way that Reverend Dr. Alexander sees the world. We'll cover all of that, as well as the role of spirituality in social change, how to stay engaged in difficult times, and what it's like to lead a congregation in today's deeply divided world. So let's get started. Thank you for being here, Reverend Alexander. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Great to see you. Great to be here. Thank you so much.
For those listening, I used to be part of the congregation with Reverend David Alexander and had the privilege of hearing his message. And I am very honored to have him here on the podcast to talk about this today. And was sad to see him go, although, of course, the ministry there at the New Thought Center for Spiritual Living in Lake Oswego goes on. But thank you for being here to talk today.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those who may not be familiar, and there may be quite a few, can you
Sure.
tell us, just for the newcomer here, what is the New Thought movement?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a rich history, and actually I've just been assigned a project for Science of Mind magazine to write about our history for new readers. So that's a good reminder. I need to get back to that draft that I have. But New Thought goes back about 150 years, turn of the century, the 18th, 19th century, came out of a kind of a fusion of several different things that were emerging in young America at that time. And those things were what we call the mind cure movement, which eventually kind of led to modern psychology, mind over matter kind of thinking. A progressive Christian movement, which continues today and really goes back to first century earliest followers of Jesus. And so when we say progressive Christian, we mean metaphysical or non-literal translation of scripture, open and inclusive, which can be a wide range of how that might show up, and really based on love and justice and community. That's how I would loosely define that. So the mind cure movement, progressive Christianity, and transcendental movement. And so most people are pretty much familiar with that one, Emerson and Thoreau. And each of those things kind of brought different gifts together. So looking at the transcendentalists brought this idea that God is not just in a church, or this energy, this intelligence is certainly not just Christian. It's everywhere. It's in everything. It's in the earth. It's in nature. It's all around us. And Emerson and others were really committed to that idea. And they were very, very curious about other traditions. And as soon as they got their hands on translations that talk about 1850s, 1840s. So they got translations of the Upanishads and other Eastern scriptures. They were fascinated and they got together in Boston, started reading it, started sharing it, started dissecting it. And so we get that kind of universal lens and approach from them. From the progressive Christians, we get, again, this idea of love and metaphorical translation of scripture, which has been around since the first century. And from the mind cure movement, we get this idea of mind over matter, positive thinking, power of affirmations, power of our word to shape our reality and
Mhm.
experience. And you kind of mush all those things together. You've ever seen those videos on TikTok or Instagram where they take the colored balls of something and mush them together and they make a new color, right? So new thought is the blend of those three things against a backdrop. I would say those three things against a backdrop of universal wisdom,
Mhm.
which means that there are sort of traces of New Thought thinking that you find in the Greek philosophies, that you find in the Hermetic teachings, that you find in native first person's spirituality, that you find in Africa spirituality and hoodoo and things of that nature. So there's a broad universal kind of scope to it as well. So today it's really tracks kind of what we would call the spiritual but not religious
Mhm.
crowd, or
Mhm.
the non-religiously affiliated, or simply the spiritual seeker.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what attracted me. I first was attracted to it during the first Trump administration.
Mm,
I'm affiliated with 12 step and recovery. And so, already had a spiritual practice and a deep meditation practice and really I felt like I needed something more. I needed something a little bit deeper and I needed a community of people that were on the same page. But I did not need what I, at least up to that moment, had been accustomed to or had knowledge of religion
mhm,
that had wounded me, at least in the past, and had wounded so many others. And so I was attracted to New Thought because of its broad openness. And
mhm.
it seemed to me in non affiliation with any particular fundamentalist belief system. It seemed very
Yeah,
open and roomy.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's definitely the experience I had and still have. And so, and very much appreciate and I think is really important for people to understand that that's available, should people need or want that
Mm.
experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say something really important there, which is, you know, coming out of the experience of the first Trump administration of you're needing something more. I'm really struck by just the phrase, that particular phrasing, needing something more, because I think that we're going into a second wave of that. We have whatever brings us peace and solace, where we get our news or whatever our tribe is, but we have also entered a hyper individualistic and a
Mhm.
kind of isolationist
Yeah.
time. COVID certainly was a part of that, but also just generationally and technology. We spent so much time on our phone. There's a great article, and I think the most recent edition, or might be the last edition, of the Atlantic magazine that talks about how lonely we are. It's all about we spend all this time on devices and we're quote unquote more connected than we've ever been, but
Mhm.
we're also more alone than we've ever been. Because even if we're on a social media platform engaging with other people, we're doing it alone. We're in our house, on our couch, or in front of our TV. So we're doing it alone, or we're watching news 24/7, but we're doing it alone. And
Yes.
this idea of how much time we spend in isolation, even if it's doing things that might technologically are considered social. So that really struck me. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I think that's going to sort of wear itself out if it hasn't already.
Mhm.
And in order for us to survive, and not just survive, but thrive and rejuvenate ourselves in this next period, we're going to need community. And, in my world, people make a big, sometimes the experts, the leaders, the mentors, and those that have gone before, and even the researchers, that make a lot about how this idea that religion is dead or church is, passe, it's old, Gen X is not going
Mhm.
to church and all of that, and the other generations. And there's a lot of conversation about that. I think over 1,000 churches a year close, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And I think we really need each other right now.
Yeah.
So whether it's churches or whether it's, I don't know that pickleball club will do it. I mean, it
I mean,
might.
it's maybe a start. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a start. It's getting you out of your house. So I'm not knocking it, but that's that idea that, we're going to need each other. We're going to need to find and create community. I'm one of the old fashioned ones that, say, don't give up on church too fast, like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Just having that nice, beautiful place to have a potluck and connect with people and do a little bit of spiritual practice and refresh during the week is not such a bad thing after all.
It really isn't. And it's a way, and however you do it, whether
Right.
somebody's in 12 step
Right.
or in some sort of mindfulness meditation meeting or a new thought or unity or whatever you do, whatever
Mhm.
works for you, just having that community and that sense of belongingness, that's
Yep.
so important. We've become so divided and so divisive, and like you said, so lonely and alone
Yep.
that when we have that connection, even those very minimal connections, I think there was something maybe also out of the Atlantic, I think during the pandemic, and they were talking about, and there was a bunch of research about people having these even minimal connections like with the Starbucks or the local cafe barista,
Mhm.
those passing moments with people we don't even know are really incredibly important,
Right.
right? Just having that connection with another human being. We are social creatures and we need to have those connections with people to feel a part of. And
Yeah.
it's really important. And part of the reason we're in this mess, I believe, is because people have felt so divided and alone and separate from other people. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got to be on this journey.
Yeah. I love
Anyway, welcome to Oregon.
Oregon doing what Oregon does.
Yes.
Yeah.
At any rate, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your story, your personal story, and your journey to New Thought and ministry, because I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah. So, and it ties right into what we were talking about because my story really begins with my mother's story.
Mhm.
She was, a single mom. My older brother was 5 or 6 at the time, and I was just a baby. And she was working in Arizona, and a coworker, out of her sensing my mom's struggles and loneliness, and needing something. She grew up Catholic and Protestant in the Midwest, and was really searching and looking for something different. Was a coworker who said, "Here, you might like this," and she handed her a copy of Science of Mind magazine. And in fact, I think the story goes that she would actually make copies of the daily. Science of Mind magazine has like a daily reading and an
Mhm.
affirmation and everything, a short little story. And so she would make a copy of that daily reading and leave it on her desk. And then my mom inquired, like, "Oh, I really like this. Where's this come from?" And so that kind of broached the friendship that they created, and they're still friends to this day. And eventually invited her to church. So I always consider it an honor, as I write a monthly column for Science of Mind magazine now, that that's where the journey began. And so it ties into what we were talking about, that it took somebody reaching out, sharing something and saying, if you might like this might work for you, come to my community. Let's go together and try it out. And she did, and she liked it. And so that's how I got into it. So I grew up in it. And how that shaped me was, I always say it's hard to rebel against oneness. Most people don't stick with the tradition they grew up with, they rebel against it at some point.
True. Yeah.
And so when you grow up with this idea that God is all there is, this intelligent universe that is showing up as everything, it's kind of hard to run away from that and go, I'm going to rebel and go do this. It's like, okay, I'm going
Right.
to go be Buddhist or, whatever, there was no resistance. It was
Mhm.
just like, oh, great. Oh, yeah, you should go explore that. You know,
Right.
tell us what you learned. Come back in 6 months and teach a class.
Right.
And so I never had that desire to rebel against it because it always left me with so much depth to explore both myself and the world. This lens, it's a lens I think that I look through,
Mhm.
a spiritual lens to view politics and life and relationships and health and just everything. And the depth of that has not disappointed me yet. There's always something new to explore in consciousness. And so growing up, I went to teen camps and young adult programs and all the things. And just one thing led to another. And I just kept wanting to serve. I just kept wanting to give back. And I just had a deep sense that, this teaching really saved my life in a lot of ways. I just said, well, what can I do to give back to it? And so I just realized I coming out of college, I was a social worker. I, worked at treatment tech facilities for adolescents and, a lot of things of that nature. But I realized no matter what I did stand-up comedy, I did, all kinds of, explored all kinds of things, worked in food service, that even if you're successful at this, that you're not really fully giving back
Mhm.
what you've been given. Like that was sort of the sense that I had in my spiritual practice and my meditation work. And so one day I just kind of asked, I was like, well, how can I give back
Mhm.
to this which has given me everything? And the answer was everything. Give me everything. I was like, oh,
Oh, just that.
yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, just that. Oh, okay. Wow. And so that led to, taking more classes in the church and eventually becoming what we call a practitioner, a prayer practitioner, to counseling and praying with folks. And that led to ministerial school. And so it was in St. Louis initially, and then came out and took a job as a youth minister in Oregon, a big church there. And then that eventually led a few years later to the opening of the center we were part of there in Lake Oswego. And that has now been, from that time to now, it's been 20 years, over
Wow.
20 years.
Yeah. And no
Yeah.
looking back, seems like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something, right? I mean, it's not a lot of us, I think not a lot of us stop and ask, okay, universe, whatever, God, whatever we believe in,
Mhm.
what am I supposed to do? We think, what do I want to do? What makes the most sense to do?
Yeah.
What's going to be supportive of my family? And those are all legit, right?
Mhm.
But very few of us ask, like, what am I, what am I here to do? Right.
Yeah.
And then let's just assume we do that, that we actually have the courage to go do it. That's, yeah. So thank you for doing that, for actually listening to that and actually then going and doing it.
Yeah, and that's the path. It's that a call to listen to
Mhm.
your own intuition and to your own inner wisdom and to that which is bigger than you are, that is calling you forward. I think for everybody, there is that thing. There's that thing that is calling you forward in your relationship, in your
Mhm.
family, in your career, in whatever slice of life you want to look at it, that's calling you to be and to do and to stretch more. Uh,
Mhm.
and if we listen to that, it leads to some pretty wonderful places. But it's definitely scary and
Mhm.
frightening along the way, and it comes with quote unquote risks or certainly sacrifices. But yeah,
Yeah.
what else are you gonna do? Once you hear it and you really get it, you're like, oh, okay, well,
Oh,
I
I
can't
guess I
not.
got to do it. Yeah. Well, I want to talk a bit about your book, which I'm going to show it for people. It's a little thin, but I'll tell you what, it's not thin for ideas. I mean,
Mhm.
holy smokes, from the get-go, it's rich. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to read this light self-help book. No, it's
Right.
not
No, it's
that.
not a self-help book. This
No.
light theological thesis,
Yeah, it's
dissertation.
yeah, it's pretty big. So your book does make the case that spirituality. I'm going to take a stab. Okay, so
Mhm.
that spirituality and justice are deeply connected. And I don't
Yes.
think I'm taking a leap there because you
No.
kind of come out and say that and
Yep.
you're open about that. So why, I mean, why and how do you think that is? If you can get to the heart of it right there.
Yeah, well, you know, it, it goes back to what we understand as new thought, or if we just leave the
Mhm.
labels off of it for a second, just the spiritual path of humanity. So a lot of people, choose a religion or a structure. Religion means, the root word of religion is to bind to an ideology, to tie ourselves to that, which is a practice. But then a lot of people are just journeying on their own, exploring in the realms of consciousness, like what works for me. And New Thought is kind of a one foot in each world in a
Mhm.
way, and attracts a lot of those spiritual seekers who really don't care whether it's religious or not, or all the other trappings that come with that, but are really interested in the spirituality aspect of it, which is great. That work and the New Thought movement became very popular through really beginning in the 1940s.
Mhm.
I would say even through all the way through the 90s. There was a good 50-year period that was really strong for New Thought, that was marked by American capitalism and the drive of individuals to succeed and be their best and get your house and picket fence and two cars in the garage and a dog, like the whole thing, right?
Right.
And capitalism and all of that. And New Thought spoke into that world, like,
Mhm.
you as an individual deserve to have all these things, and here's how
Sure,
you
you can manifest it. Yeah.
yeah, you can
Hmm.
manifest it, and yeah, all that.
Hmm.
I don't
Sure.
have no problem with people being self-fulfilled and fully expressed and happy in their life. That's a wonderful thing, to have a spiritual tradition that speaks life into that. The question becomes, for what?
Mm. Hmm.
Right. So for me, I've been on this journey my whole life. I didn't come into it at, 35 or 40, or even at 50, like, somewhere else, like a lot of people do,
Hmm.
after leaving a job or a relationship or whatever, and searching and seeking. I just grew up in this awareness, and it was like, this awareness that you are one with this divine power and energy, and it moves through you, and you can create and manifest your life, and you have access to this power. And so, if that's my first language, I've got a friend here who's actually a New Thought Pentecostal minister, so that's a whole different episode.
Yes.
you know, but he calls me Neo from the Matrix. He
Uh,
you were born in this, right? You didn't come into it. You are born of this new reality,
hmm.
we're all trying to get a grasp of. And so for me, it became second nature. If that my beginning language was just this oneness consciousness, then the next question is, okay, for what? Now what?
Yeah.
And now that I know all that, and I have all these skills that I can use to create the life I want, well, what good does it do me to create the life I want while my neighbors are suffering, the world is on fire, or that we're, like that? And if I'm just doing my daily spiritual practice, which includes grounding myself in an awareness of my oneness with all life, well, if that moves just a little bit from the head to the heart, then oneness doesn't just isn't just that, oh, there's an energy that connects me to everything, but that, oh no, I really am one. And it becomes a dawning, an awakening in your consciousness. No, actually, you really are one with everything, including that guy you just passed who was outside of your windshield at the
Mhm.
stoplight, and including that story you saw on the news about, who's suffering and wherever. And we got tons of things we could fill in the blank there with. So to me, it was about expanding out from the heart into the collective, and not moving away from individual success or any of that, but expanding that oneness out. In the book, I call it the radical implication.
Hmm.
Right? What's the radical implication of our teaching? What's the radical implication of our philosophy or theology, or whatever word you want to use? What's the radical implication of oneness, or the radical implication of peace or justice or wholeness, or anything else? And what I discovered was that, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they all the major religions have a huge social component to them.
Hmm.
And there wasn't a lot of language about that in New Thought, but there was a emerging of that in our the leader, myself as a leader and other leaders, we were talking more and more about that, but there wasn't any text to reference it.
Mm.
Right. Ernest Holmes didn't write a lot about it. Some of the other New Thought authors didn't write a lot about it. And so I thought, there's something missing here. We keep having the debate, like amongst ourselves, like clergy get behind closed doors, and we go, are we a social justice teaching? Are we supposed to be doing that? Because for any listeners who might be saying, well, what's the conflict? The conversation was moving from the inside out. If you just focus on your individual consciousness, then everything else will take care of itself, and that don't focus on external conditions because that's a distraction. Like that's kind of the old school
Mm.
thing. Don't get distracted by say the status of your bank account. Don't get distracted
Hmm.
by that, because that's just the world appearing the way it's appearing. Get connected inside to the abundance that's within you, and then the
Right.
outside will change, right? So it's okay, I get that. But again, the radical implication of oneness, shouldn't we be seeing evidence of that? If we've spent all this time in this oneness, grounding, shouldn't we be seeing, and aren't you moved by your prayer and your meditation, for the individual, if you're focusing on your abundance or your health or perfect relationship or whatever, doesn't at some point that change your behavior? That you
Right.
start managing your money differently, or you start showing up in your relationship differently, and you start, like, what's the external effect of that? And the external effect of that is that things don't just magically change because you focused on it. They change because it changes you, and you start behaving differently. And so for me, I was looking for that. Well, where is the evidence of that, and where are we talking about how that works? And so theologically, what I'm all of that word salad that just came out of me is really liberation theology.
Hmm.
And so I just said, well, we need to stop having behind closed doors to having the debate, and let's just start writing about our teaching from that perspective, which nobody else had done. I wasn't the only one that thought that way, but there was nothing to grasp on or to direct students or ministerial folks or our
Right.
leadership or anybody to say, well, here's read this, and now let's get back together and discuss it. So I said, well, I'll start.
Better write a book. I know.
Yeah.
I was just looking at, and what's great about this book for the listeners is it really is that book. And I was looking at, I had marked one page, and it's page 112, and I'm just going to read one paragraph if that's okay.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna get mine and follow along.
Yeah, follow along. Page 112,
I
and
love it.
it's below a quote. You've quoted James Cone, Black
Yeah.
Theology, Black
Uh-huh.
Power, where he had said philosophy is personal, theology is
Yes.
communal. And then you wrote, as long as we insist that our teaching is only relevant at the personal level, we will remain impotent to address social ills and as a result, increasingly irrelevant. It's not that personal success, achievement, and empowerment work is no longer important. Quite the opposite. Such work is as important as it ever was or has been. But the work of personal development must occur in tandem with social and community work. Failure to recognize this fact positions our teaching in a posture of private good, a position defined by privilege. It is time for us to enter the age of first person plural. As the saying goes, none of us are free until all of us are free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then for those who are following along, your book has throughout it reflection questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is meant to be something that is done together, which I love, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just meant to, I mean, you can just read it by yourself if you
Right.
want, but it's meant to be done in a group, so that you can talk about it with others. And I was just struck by that particular paragraph that, ends with that quote, that saying, none of us are free until all of us are free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what you were talking about, that like we are not just doing this just for our own benefit. We have to start talking about this so that and doing things so that it benefits all of us, because regardless of what we believe, it what we think, what we do impacts everyone around us, which in turn impacts ourselves,
Right.
right?
Right.
We are one, right?
Yeah, that's it. No, Thomas Merton said, "No man is an island."
Right.
And it's that idea that we're all connected. So what good does it do? So wave a magic wand. There you've manifested, you've done law of attraction or whatever, or yoga, meditation, or whatever else that you did
Hmm.
to get your enlightenment. And now you've got all the things, your heart's desire, boom, like the Buddha. I mean, that's what
Hmm.
Siddhartha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, wondering about the suffering of the world. And he came from opulence and
Hmm.
he's like, he had everything. Had it all. He didn't need to go and sit there and contemplate all those things. But what drove him to the meditation practice was, well, why do I have all of this if everybody outside the palace is suffering?
Right.
What good does that do me? And so that drove him to that. So if we imagine ourselves having all the things that we want, how do you get those things? Who delivers the groceries? Who we saw during the pandemic, how do things get to the grocery store? Who picks the lettuce in the field? Who,
Hmm.
who
Right.
flies the plane that you take on your vacation that you've got more than enough money to do, twice a year or whatever, like whatever it is that your heart's desire, like it is interdependent on a whole network of people, places, and things working economically, socially, etc., coming together to quote unquote create your independent life the way you want it.
Right. Right.
It's not independent at all. It's completely dependent on all these other things coming together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that is precisely why when we're driving and we stop at the intersection and we see the unhoused person suffering, why it is so difficult to look at them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
because we're human and we see the suffering, and it is hard to witness the suffering without actually doing something about it, right?
Yeah.
So now we have this moral responsibility, don't we? Right?
Yes. Yes.
So how, I mean, it can be overwhelming as it is. I mean, right now in particular, right? There's so much going on, and we're just
Yeah.
inundated with suffering and divisiveness, and I mean, it's chaotic out there.
Mhm.
So for anyone who's listening who wants to take some action in some way, on a through a spiritual lens of some sort, but they don't know where to start, where do they start?
Oh, wow. I posted something on my Substack a while back about that. Like, how do we navigate this time that we're in? And I think the first thing I said was around education. I
Hmm.
said be mindful of, you know, I, because as you know, member of my congregation for a while there, that
Hmm.
I always teach from where I'm coming from. I
Yes.
can only teach what I'm living out in my
Hmm.
own life. And so I was reflecting on my own journey, like, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do now with all this chaos going on? Because I had my desire to consume news, which is already pretty high, had just tanked after I was just like, I
Yeah.
don't want to watch any of it. I'm
Right.
unplugging and I'm just like, forget it. Like, I just can't. And it literally hurt. It was like painful for a while. And then I was like, okay, I can't just can't just watch nothing. I gotta, be engaged somehow. And so that became the first step. It was like, be mindful of what
Mhm.
you're consuming and where you're consuming it from. And there's lots of good, healthy choices out there. But what I started doing was I started reading more and watching less,
Yes.
because the television news, no matter what source you take it from, there's a narrative that is driving, those sources. Breaking news moniker is used way too much.
Yes.
Everything is breaking news, and
It is, isn't it? That's all I
hang
ever
on
see.
to
Breaking
the next
news.
thing, next thing, next
Yeah.
thing. So there's this addiction cycle, thing.
Hmm.
PBS is a little better about those things, and the BBC, we watch sometimes that in our house, and it's so funny because they're kind of their mellow voices and
Yeah.
the accent and everything, and it's like the same news story, but it's a completely different
It's
tone.
a whole different experience.
Yeah. So whether Al Jazeera or, just some other source, be mindful of that, the sources. And so for me, it was less television and more reading
Hmm.
as a way to just, make sure that I'm not inundated with somebody else's tonality
Hmm.
of the narrative. And then it was, activate, to find something to do, to not just do nothing, but there's phone calls you can make.
Yeah.
There's, there's lots of different things. I think there's a website called Call
Yeah.
5.org, I think. Gives you the issues, the information, all fill in. There's lots of other advocacy groups like, well, where you are, Basic Rights Oregon,
Hmm.
here it's Georgia Equality, whether
Hmm.
Human Rights Campaign, HRC is, nationwide, and there's state organizations. And so whatever issue you care about, there's probably some advocacy agency that's doing something, the ACLU,
Hmm.
and they'll give you easy ways to connect and make your voice heard and express something so that you feel like you're actively doing something. And because it's one little drop, it's like, well, but it's just a drop. It's like, well, yeah, but the Grand Canyon was,
Yeah.
rock, but it was just a drop, that, and one drop adds to another and carves out, seemingly immovable objects. And so educate, activate. The third step was rest.
So
Like,
important.
yes, I'm not a big conspiracy theory person, but they could be any side or all sides if you want,
Sure.
but just, just whatever they is for you. They're depending on us being drained, being worn
Hmm.
out, being overwhelmed, being exhausted. And it's easy to get there into all those places if you allow yourself. And so rest and self-care and playing this for the long haul is really, really important. I had said something on another podcast recently, and it was an African American woman justice leader who was leading it and it's part of her community. And I said, how do I pace myself? Because she was talking about pace yourselves. And most of her community is African American. And I said, how do I pace myself? This was several weeks ago during all of this emergency, everything's a
Hmm.
crisis,
Hmm.
And her response was, she goes, yeah, but it's not. She said,
Mm.
here's the thing. She said, hey, everything's an emergency for white bodied people. Right. That was literally I was like, oh, oh. She goes,
Yeah.
yeah, for the rest of us, another day, another dollar. It's
A
been
long
like
time.
this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I knew that. I have
Hmm.
Black children. My wife
Yep.
is from Zambia. So there's more awakeness around that in my household than might be otherwise. And I pay
Hmm.
attention. So I knew that in terms of my level of outrage about things, police brutality and things like that. I'm like, no, we just need to roll up our sleeves and do the work. It's not about being
Yeah.
on social media and being outraged about it. I knew it at that level. But when she said it just about everything else politically, she was like, yeah, no, it's an emergency for you.
Mm.
You're
That's.
panicked.
Hmm.
You know, the last administration wasn't that much better for us.
Right.
The administration before we were here before this is this guy's second round. We'll go back to Reagan and talk about that if you want. Like she was just like we could go da, 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 all the way.
Yeah.
So rest, take care of yourself, pace for the long haul because we're trying to bend the arc here of justice.
Right.
And it's going to take time. And so that sense of we got to do it all right now. There's definitely something to do now, for sure. Do that
Yeah.
and take care of yourself. So educate, activate, rest, and then recalibrate was the last one.
Hmm.
Recalibrate. And that was about kind of where our conversation started. Get in community,
Hmm. Hmm.
whether that's church or spiritual community or yoga or some other group, but get with other bodies
Right.
and doing a practice of some kind. It could be knitting and a book study group or something that allows you to recalibrate and reset And so it's self-care, but it's at the communal level, like do it with other people. And
Right.
I will keep advocating for spaces like church or spiritual communities because there's a chance that, it will be intergenerational,
Hmm.
hopefully multicultural, that's can be a hard find sometimes. And maybe even some people that didn't vote the way you did are in that same congregation, right?
Yeah.
The point is the more you're with a group like that, that opportunity to have conversation with a
Hmm.
diverse mix of people and backgrounds and age groups and all of that is really important for your whole psychosocial mindset and just to reset
Hmm.
uh, and recalibrate. Yeah.
I like that. And, I found I did some traveling over the summer into different parts of still the West Coast, but different parts of the West Coast, which are really different
Hmm.
politically. And one of the things that I tried to do was to find common ground with people who it was very obvious they were very different politically from me.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
was fascinating because we're radically different. And that is true in many ways, but we're also radically the same in many,
Right.
many ways. And so trying to find those similarities rather than just the differences and finding those common grounds was very healing for me and I'd wager for the other person as well. And so I think that's a really important message that you're talking about is
Yeah.
trying to find those people that might have voted differently
Mhm.
and might have different views and seeing what kind of common ground there might be there. I think is really
Yeah.
important.
And that's certainly, I've seen reactions to things like this on social media. I'm certainly not saying you need to make friends with people who hold views that put your life or your children or based on your orientation or your gender or nationality or anything like that at risk. No.
Right.
Like boundaries, boundaries,
Definitely
boundaries.
not. Yeah.
You do not have to be friends with somebody who wants to degrade your humanity.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Uh, but again, I think there's a lot of space between that boundary and having conversation with people who think differently than you and realizing that you shop at the same grocery stores and your food comes from the same place and like we all need clean water, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important because otherwise you can get really overwhelmed. And if you stay connected, if you recalibrate, if you find ways to activate, like you said, if you rest, we're going to get through whatever this is, right?
Hmm.
I have to believe that.
Yeah.
I have to believe that. And if we take the long view, the historical view, I mean,
We've made it through a lot of things, and certainly, I mean, I'm Gen X, so I believe this is the most perilous uh, space that democracy has been in during my lifetime, but not my parents and not my grandparents. I think,
right.
there have been other spaces in our history. And so, yeah, we have to pay attention. We have to keep our eye on what's happening and do our part. And that activation is so important. I heard something the other day. I don't remember who said it, so I'm going to attribute it to Anonymous. But I thought it was really brilliant. Hope without action is just privilege in disguise.
Mm, yeah. Hope without
Yeah,
action is just privilege in disguise. Yeah.
yeah, because it was somebody was like, "Well, I have hope," and the conversation was like, "Well, okay, but what are you doing?
Hmm.
What are you doing to help right now?" And it was like, "It's great that you feel hopeful, but make sure you're doing your part, whatever that is." Because hope without action is just it's like that, just get to sit back and just kind of let it all do its thing and quote unquote have hope. Wow, that's nice.
Yeah. And we all have our part right now.
Yeah.
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 Kind of getting back to New Thought, what do you
Yeah.
think New Thought's part is in all of this?
Well, this is, if ever there's a hill to die on, like that's kind of That would be my prologue to the book, right? The book came out about a year ago, and lots of people are having study groups in churches around the
Hmm.
country, which is great. And I'm writing some curriculum for ministerial school, and those are all things that I wanted to have happen with it. So I'm thrilled about that. One of the things I talk about in the book are these myths that
Hmm.
we have to get over. And one of the biggest ones is this fear that, because New Thought, by and large, is mostly white, mostly middle to upper class, mostly Protestant informed backgrounds, and I would say a mix of conservative and liberal, depending on where in the country. But when you combine all that together, one of the things that lives very strongly, similar to in other Protestant religions as well, is this idea that religious spaces or spiritual spaces should be apolitical. They should
Hmm.
be neutral, that we should be, we shouldn't get involved because we don't want to offend anybody. And we should just focus on, let's just focus on your individual spiritual work and just let the chips kind of fall where they may. And, go vote and be active and go do what, you need to do. But we're going to hold space for everybody here. And that idea has been really strong in New Thought like forever. And again, it's not just New Thought, there's other Protestant groups
Sure.
for which that is true. That to me is the biggest thing. Like, this is the moment that is now
Hmm.
screaming at us. Like, you have got to get over that.
Yeah.
Because frankly, that is and I point out in the book, that is a symptom of white slaveholder religion.
Yeah.
White Protestant Christianity is the only religion in the world that has ever said we're supposed to be apolitical and neutral in
Because
matters
it
of.
sure is convenient for that,
Right,
right?
right. you know,
Hmm.
like never in the history of ever, as religion, it's always taken a side, and it's
Hmm.
always taken a side for the oppressed, for the
Yeah.
downtrodden, for the victimized, for justice, for the greatest good of all. Like, that's always been the position, always, in every
Yeah.
culture around the world, in every tradition. And then suddenly we have this Americanized, white Protestant Christianity that's like, no, no, let's be nice. Let's not offend anybody on Sunday. What? Where?
Yeah.
Why? And New Thought adopted that mentality, and so for me, a big push in the book is like, get over it. Just get
Right.
over it because it's hurting us. And if you get out on those skinny branches, well, it might offend congregants. Yeah, you probably will. You could probably fill another church with the people that I've scared away. I want to say this to if there's any other ministers listening, but even people, if you have a spiritual community, here's the thing: you don't have to agree with your pastor all the time.
Hmm.
I don't expect that people agree with everything that I say.
Right.
I hope they don't. And I expect you to walk away and think, what does that mean for you? I
Hmm.
said this, it might have rubbed you the wrong way. If it rubbed you the wrong way, politically, socially, morally, whatever, then I expect you to go and investigate what that is about for you. Why did that bother me? Where does that come from? And then you do your own inquiry, not, oh, he offended me, so I'm going to go find another church.
I'm out.
Like,
Yeah.
what is that? So pastors need to get over the fact that you might offend some people. Let them be offended.
Hmm.
But also parishioners or participants, like, it's okay. You don't stop thinking that you need to be triggered. You need to be activated into your own deeper inquiry of what it is that you believe. And some of your greatest teachers will be people that poke you in the wrong
Yes.
places, right? Because they invite you to go inward and think about it. So that's where we're at. Like, we need to find that moral backbone and be really strong about where we stand. And if people need to leave, then let them leave. But I don't think that that's the solution. So to people who feel offended and they have a foot out the door, I would just say, hang on just a second. Be mad if you need to be mad, but come back next week and let's talk about it.
Right.
Like, what might that world look like? What if you were safe? What if this place was safe enough for you to be upset, and then we could actually have a conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. What would that look like?
Yeah, yeah.
Anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to talk about today?
Oh gosh, probably, but I don't know. I mean, in terms of the book and kind
Hmm.
of what I'm doing, what I'm up to, those are the major highlights. I would just say that I really get how kind of scary and concerning it is right now. You know, I our family is one in which, my wife's got the bags packed and the passports in the, like she's ready to go. One more, she's like, one more news story, and then we're out of here. And that's not just, some people have been saying that since 2016 or whatever, but there's some realness to that in
Mm-hmm.
my family. And I know for lots of people, because there's some ways in which some of the things that are happening are really threatening to our sense of safety and education and what we're trying to provide for our children and trying to communities we're trying to build. So to anybody and everybody out there who's listening, and I certainly can't tell anybody what to do in regards to that, except to pull close to each other, and create community and find, again, because we have become so isolated and separated, to, if you've disengaged from a particular kind of community, to re-engage and talk to each other and do things like this, listen to podcasts and create spaces where you're learning and growing, because we will get through this one way or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find you, learn more about you, read what you're writing? You have a podcast too. You have all sorts of things going on. Let us know where
Yeah,
we can find you.
yeah. I all kinds of things. I have revdavidalexander.com is just a general website. Just kind of can poke around and find everything there. Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta is the community. That's slca.com, and it has all of our messages and everything that we got going on through the community there, which has a broad listening audience, people all over the world and all over the country, part of our community. And the space I'm most excited about is Substack. I've just recently, since January, I joined back in November and wrote a few things, but it wasn't until January that things really took off. I'm so excited because it's a platform that I can do podcasts, I could do writing. And that was part of my re-education as well. Like I said, I was watching less TV and reading more.
Hmm.
And so I was just started finding news people and just different things. It was just like so refreshing to just
Yes.
read instead of just television consume. And so I've just been loving that space, and my subscribing list there is growing, and I'm providing more and more, and it's just been wonderful. So I connect to everything that I'm doing through Substack. I write a monthly column for Science Mind magazine,
Hmm.
and I write regularly for the Substack and connect all the pieces together there. Really building out my new book, my next book, which is Liberation Lens, the Liberation Lens. And there's kind of 8 pillars or viewpoints that we're taking through that. And I'm just taking them one at a time and making them short podcast episodes, and then writing out the fuller chapters as I go. So if you join that, you'll actually be kind of getting previews of what the new book will be all about. It's kind of the individualized version of what Freedom from Discord was,
Hmm.
kind of the public theology, kind of communal aspect of it in terms of uh, church work and theological constructs. And the new one will break it down into individual spiritual quest kind of perspective.
So exciting. It's
Yeah,
it's great to see all the work that you're doing and
thank you. So
uh,
that's
yeah.
Rev D Alexander at Substack.com.
I'll make sure to put this
Yeah, yeah.
all the good stuff in the show notes so people can find you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to have you on again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, you too. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for joining me on the Fully Mindful podcast. If you got value from this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who'd love this content too. Remember, small moments of mindfulness can lead to big changes in your day-to-day life. Until next time, take a deep breath, stay present, and tap into your own mindfulness.